Hello everyone, my name is Al Parsai. I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. I'm the author of the bestseller book 88 Tips on Immigration to Canada. I also teach at Ashton College. What I teach is immigration consulting. And today I'm going to talk about an interesting topic, which is self-employment immigration to Canada. So without further ado, let's begin. You need to know that there are three major options of immigration to Canada, and I touched upon those a little bit in my previous videos. But just to recap, we have family reunification options, immigration under economic classes, and also refugees. So the topic of self-employment immigration falls under economic immigration, which is derived from Section 12, Sub 2 of the Immigration Act. Economic immigration to Canada on its own is divided into two major groups: federal immigrations and provincial immigrations. Provincial immigrations target those people who want to immigrate to Canada, but for the purpose of residing in a specific province or territory of Canada. But economic immigration means that you immigrate to Canada, but maybe you haven't made up your mind yet, and you may end up living in any province or territory of Canada with the exception of Quebec. So if your destination is anywhere but the province of Quebec, then you may immigrate under federal immigration options. And if we look at the economic immigration options, federal. So if we look at the federal immigration options, we can divide them into three major groups plus a subgroup. So the three major groups include express entry system, which on its own covers federal self-employed class, Canadian experienced class, and federal skilled trades class. Then the next option would be self-employed class, which we will talk about today. And the third option is startup visa. On top of these three, we also have some temporary options or pilot options that come and go, like the agricultural pilot that will commence in March or April 2020. Today, let's talk about self-employed class. So self-employed class is defined under Section 88, Sub 1 of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations. And it covers three methods of immigration, or three groups of people. One of them is those people who are active in cultural activities. The other one targets athletics. And the third one is agriculture. Unfortunately, the government of Canada stopped accepting applications for farm management or agriculture under self-employed class back in 2018. So unfortunately, this is not an option for now. If you already have submitted your application under this program, they still review those applications, so they won't reject you because of this decision, but they won't accept new applications. So let's talk about the other two, because those are the existing ones. So as I mentioned, one of them would be cultural activities, the other one is athletics. So when it comes to cultural activities, think about, for example, artistic painters, musicians, people who are active in theater, directors of movies, or in general, whoever is related to movie industry, and many other things like handicrafts and so on and so forth. But keep this in mind, that when you are applying, you also need to be a self-employed person. So if you are an artist, but you work for a company as an employee, despite that your activities are artistic, you cannot apply under this program. So we need a combination of cultural activities, like you are a freelance author. You write books, sell books, and make money because of your books. Not somebody who is hired by a newspaper, for example, to write for them. As long as you are self-employed and the activity is cultural activity, then you might be able to apply if you meet the rest of the requirements, okay? The same thing is for athletics. Of course, we are talking about professional athletes, and it could be any field. And we also talk about coaches, that they help them to proceed, or referees, as long as they are, again, self-employed and they are active in the field of athletics. Before I explain self-employment in more details, I need to explain a term, and that term is qualified period or qualifying period. Qualifying period refers to the duration in which your self-employment activity is acceptable by the immigration authorities of Canada. And calculating it is a little bit difficult. So let's imagine that you submit your application for immigration on April 1st, 2020. Okay? Now roll back for 5 years and you reach April 1st, 2015. So the qualifying period starts from April 1st, 2015. So in other words, the beginning of the qualifying period is exactly 5 years from the day that you submitted the application. So 5 years before the day that you submitted your application. So when is the end date of the qualifying period? The end date is when the officer makes a decision about your application. Now, I've had applications that the officers process them in less than 6 months. I've had applications that the officer processed them in about 5 years. So that means that it's super difficult to think about the end date of this application. It could be just a few weeks from the day that you submit the application to several months from the day that you submit the application. That's why when you are submitting your application, you need to make sure that you already meet the requirements of this method of immigration. Okay? Now let's talk about who is self-employed. So the definition of self-employed is under Section 88, Sub 1 of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations. Under that section of the law, it says you are a self-employed person if you meet any of these 3 options that I'm talking about. Number 1 is that you have 2 periods of 12 months, or let's say 2 years, of self-employed activities during the qualifying period. Okay? So 2 years of self-employment activity. 2 years of self-employment activity, it could be, for example, 1 year here, 1 year there, but both of those 1 years, they need to fall under that 2-year period, that qualifying period, which is at least 5 years. So the self-employment activity, it means that it was culture or athletics, either or. So you cannot apply under both of them at the same time. So either cultural activities or athletics, and also it generated enough money to cover your expenses and your family members' expenses. The second option, so this is first option, 2 years of self-employment activity. The second option is that you have competed or worked as a world-class artist or athlete. And by world-class, it means that either the applicant is a celebrity in her field or in his field, or maybe the applicant was competing as the highest levels of his or her career. And let's discuss this a little bit more. So this means that either somebody is very well known, like an actor that pretty much everybody knows that person, or they have gone beyond their country, their region, their continent, and they have competed at the highest levels. So for example, for an athlete, that athlete received a bronze medal. If that athlete is, let's say, from Europe, that athlete received a bronze medal also in Asia, received a silver medal in Americas, received a gold medal in Australia. So that person is well known or very successful in Europe, in Asia, in Americas, in Australia. Now we are talking about somebody who may qualify as a person who had world-class qualities. The same thing for an artist. For an artist, for example, a painter, that painter sold her paintings in continents outside her own continent, or inside her continent as well. So she managed to go beyond her country, she managed to go beyond her continent, and that's when we say that this person is successful out at the world level. Okay, so 2 years of self-employment or 2 years of world-class activities, or a combination of both. In other words, 1 year of world-class and 1 year of self-employment. So any of those combinations could be acceptable, but it needs to be in the qualifying period. Okay, so do we need a minimum income? The simple answer to that is that yes, the minimum income is the income that covers your expenses and your family members' expenses. And when we talk about family members, it means your spouse or common law partner and your children who are under 22 years of age, if we want to simplify it. So your income, your self-employment income, needs to be enough to cover the expenses of you and your family members, regardless of other sources of income, that regardless of your spouse's income, regardless of, for example, if you have a rental property income, those are not acceptable. You need to show that your income from self-employment activities was enough to cover the expenses of yourself and your family during those dates that you say that you were self-employed. Okay? The other issue that you need to prove to immigration authorities is intent and ability. It means that you have the intent and ability to be a self-employed person in Canada. Okay? The officer looks into your previous history, how successful you were back home or internationally, and that of course shows them that you could also be successful in Canada. They look into a business plan that you have shown to them, and that business plan is comprehensive, explains that you know what you are doing. They look into how much you have contacted the people you have mentioned on the business plan, the Canadian organizations. Did you make any arrangements with them? Have you signed any memorandum of understanding with any of them? Have you received any job offers, freelance job offers from them? Are you already working with Canadian entities? Do you already have a work permit to Canada and you're already in Canada and working in Canada? And can you make an investment in Canada? Do you have enough money to make an investment and pursue your self-employment activities? The officer considers all of those to see if you actually have the intent and ability to settle in Canada as a self-employed person. If you look at Section 88, sub 1 of the regulations, it also talks about significant contributions. But my personal experience in the past 9 years that I have worked with many self-employed applicants is that the officers do not focus on significant contribution that much. And it's partly because if you look at the operational manuals for the officers, they say that use significant contribution only when you are concerned that maybe this applicant is not a serious applicant. Otherwise, if the applicant shows that they have a very good history, they also prove that they have the intent and ability to establish their self-employment activity in Canada, then the chances that the officers approve the application is relatively high. There is also a point system for self-employed applicants. It's a 100-point system, and you need to receive at least 35 points to qualify for this method. As you can see, 35 out of 100 is nothing. And I explained to you the details of the point system. And also under Section 100 sub 2 of the regulations, it says that if the officer is not convinced that the applicant meets the minimum requirements and the definition and the intent and ability, just refuse the application. Don't calculate the points. So simply put, I haven't seen any cases who was approved or who was refused that the officer actually calculated the points. So don't count on the points. But again, it gives you an idea of other merits of this kind of application. So education, up to 25 points. Now, for somebody who holds a master's degree or a PhD, that would be 25 points. For somebody who has a high school diploma, it's 5 points. Below high school diploma, nothing. Experience, 35 points for 5 years of work experience as a self-employed person. If you accept you have a complete 5 year of work experience, then you receive the whole 35 points. Obviously, under 2 years, you will receive 0 points and you will be refused. But between 2 years and 5 years, it varies from 20 points to 35 points. Age, if you are between 18 and 49, you will receive 10 points. Below that or above, below 18 years, you won't receive points. Above 49, you will lose points. Official languages, if you are familiar with English or French languages, you need to take the tests, so either IELTS General or CELPIP-G or TEF Canada or TCF Canada for the language, and then based on that, they assign points to you. If you don't hand over English or French test results, you won't receive points, but by default, they won't refuse your application. However, keep this in mind. You are immigrating to Canada, which has 2 official languages, English or French. You need to know at least one of them to be able to survive in Canada. That's one point. The other point is that if you take the test and your test results are good, then it has just some positive effect on the officer because they know they are dealing with somebody who has no issues in terms of language. There are no language barriers for that person. So it's a good idea that you take the tests and present the test to the immigration officer. You could also receive up to 6 points under adaptability. And adaptability means, for example, your spouse is an educated person, or you have studied or worked in Canada, or you have relatives in Canada. Again, receiving 35 points of 100 points is not a big deal, and it also not an indication of success. The important part is to show that you have the experience, intent, and ability to immigrate to Canada under this program. I also need to talk about challenges a little bit. So keep this in mind that this is a discretionary method of application for immigration officers. And I have tried to convince the immigration authorities to have a more objective approach to this system. But for now, it is very discretionary and subjective. Depending on the officer that reviews your application, their point of view could be different. And that's why you may feel that you are a very good candidate for this method of application, but you end up being refused. And to avoid that, or at least to mitigate that and reduce the chances of being refused, you need to look into yourself first of all, see if you are truly a super successful artist or athlete, and then also present several documents. Usually a package that we send to the immigration authorities is anywhere between 400 to 800 pages. So you need to prepare lots of documents to prove to the immigration officer that you are a very successful self-employed athlete or artist, and also you have built the connections. And also, the last thing is that if you can get a work permit to Canada first and come here and work as a self-employed person, that will really help you with the cause, because you prove to the immigration authorities that you have the ability and intent to work as a self-employed person. In other words, instead of applying for immigration as a self-employed person, see if you can come here and actually work here. And there is an option under International Mobility Program that self-employed people could receive work permit and come to Canada and work. So if you pursue that option and you succeed and come here and work in Canada for a while, a few months, and then apply for the self-employed class, that will enhance your chances of success incredibly and to a very great extent. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about self-employed class. I hope you enjoyed this session. In future sessions, we will talk about other options of immigration, work, and life in Canada. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.